When I was in the Scouts, or rather the local equivalent, legally adult Scouts had to do the three feather challenge. One day without food, one day without speaking, and one day at night, alone in the woods with only a knife and a tarp, unseen by any other human, after which one has to sneak back to the scout camp unnoticed by the sentries and report back to the camp master. It was my third day, so I took off, walked for miles through the woods, and finally came across the most remote spot in the wilderness, most overgrown part of the woods, in fact. I spent a spooky but rather uneventful night until almost before dawn when I decided to go for a morning swim in the lake right before taking off to go back. I stripped nude and went towards the lake, but then noticed a group of guys fishing, so I ultimately decided to go back. Suddenly, the ground underneath my feet caved in, and I found myself submerged up to my armpits in the most absolute vilest mass I have ever smelled. It ended up being a pit where poachers would dump the guts and leftovers of illegally poached animals, and it was sitting there, fermenting for weeks. Imagine the scene. A group of anglers hear some ungodly screaming from the direction of the woods, and run there to see if someone needs help. What they instead see is a teenager-shaped ghoul covered completely in blood and rotten offal, who is crawling out of a bloody hole in the ground while shrieking and weeping, and then runs at them to get to the lake and wash off. I find it funny now, but at the time, they were probably scared shitless. One of my best buds from college was a geologist major and ended up becoming a ranger in the southeast US. Haven't spoken in years, as is the case with age, but I remember about 8 to 9 years back he was telling me about an old married couple that he had recently helped out. He had seen them come to the park several days in a row, and found out they were visiting from out west, and they had gotten engaged there decades prior. They had been searching for a spot they had taken pictures of where he popped the question, but were having trouble. After looking at the pictures and figuring out roughly where they were trying to get to, he escorted them in his vehicle, then hiked with them to where he thought it would be. They ended up finding it, and he left them there and went back to his station at the entrance. He said he got a weird feeling once he got back and felt like he needed to wait to see them whenever they left. Well, once it came time to lock up for the night, he still hadn't seen them leave, so he reported it, left his assistant to wait at the shack at the entrance, and went back to where he left them. He found both of them lying down spooning along the bank of the river, but neither of them were alive. So, naturally, he called the cops, went through the whole 9 yards, and eventually went home. The police were able to disclose to him their identities, but weren't sure of anything else initially. Later, he learned that the wife was terminally ill with cancer, and they had both committed suicide by ingesting some sort of chemical or pill combustion medley. They just chose to do it where they shared a very happy memory. My buddy wasn't torn up about it. He was obviously sad about them both dying, but said that he thought they hadn't asked for help earlier because they didn't want anyone to think they helped kill them. I've got a deep woods story that's been shared in my family for quite a few years. My great uncle was a deep woods kind of guy. In a practice, I find this a little weird. He would rarely use a tent, just set up a sleeping bag right on the ground. Since we're from Maine, there aren't too many large predators that really mess with people. There are black bears, but they usually hide from people, so I guess he just didn't feel worried. So he's out sleeping in the woods when he feels tiny hands patting his face. So he wakes up, opens his eyes only to see a raccoon standing over him, just feeling his face. So what does my great uncle do? He just goes back to sleep. Never gets old. Not a ranger, but I was hiking in Andro with a friend. Long story short, we got lost off the trail and ended up in Spain. Found another trail and were following it without a map. A while ahead of us, we see a man with 2 golden retrievers walking in the same direction we are. He looks young and is carrying climbing gear over his shoulders. We're rushing down the trail to catch up with him and finally do. We ask him for help and directions, and he tells us exactly where we are and where we need to be. About 12 kilometers away, there's a town with a hotel. He says there's another smaller town about 6 kilometers away, and that he parked his car there. He says he can give us a lift for the last 6 kilometers if we'd like, but says that he is in a hurry. We are over the moon, and so we hike together for a while. The dogs are nice and friendly, running circles around us. We are chatting away to the guy, and he is really nice, but my friend and I are getting tired, so we cannot keep pace with him for long. The trail bends away to the right, and the man, now a bit ahead of us, disappears behind the bend. We get there a couple of minutes later, and the trail is completely empty. No man, and no dogs, even though the trail is a straight shot for quite a while, and we should have been able to see him. The two of us continue on, alarmed, waiting to hear or see something, or perhaps be murdered by a stranger. Nothing. We get to the town eventually, and from there made it to the safety of a hotel in the next town over. We were completely freaked out by the sudden disappearance, and to this day we are both convinced that he was a ghost. I'm a forest ranger, not a police officer, and work at a pretty remote desert park. This happened before I got there, but the other rangers I work with were there originally. They went to do a patrol during summer, our off-season, at one of our seldom used campgrounds. On that patrol, our maintenance ranger found a burned-out car in one of the sites. The desert is a weird place, so he just calls the sheriff and waits. Sheriff arrives, and it turns out there's a body in the driver's seat, with no arms and no legs, just a torso and a head, burnt to a crisp. Sheriffs just marked it as a suicide and removed the vehicle. We're close to Mexico and get a lot of illegal drug trafficking, so I guess they don't even bother trying to solve these. Super sketchy. Ex-Ranger here. We had a group of frat boys making way too much noise. We came by twice, and at the second stop, I told them, "This is your last warning." Not only is it rude for other campers to be so loud, it's exceptionally dangerous. Everyone knows that the local mountain lions are attracted to loud noises at night, and these ghost cats, as they are called, can creep right up on you without you hearing or seeing them. Whatever you do, don't leave your tent tonight. If you hear anything, don't make a sound. We went back to the station, grabbed the lion pelt from the intercept center and the night vision goggles. The head ranger had to blow what was left of the budget at the end of the previous year. Once they were all in their tents, we crept into the campsite and made fake lion tracks everywhere. We set up the lion pelt, propped up over some sticks. The other ranger got out the PA and from a distance started doing fake lion calls, slowly getting closer. I pulled the jeep forward like we were arriving on scene and got out, turned on my mag light and illuminated the silhouette of the lion pelt. Because I was moving quickly, the shadow of the lion appeared to be moving. At this point, the frat boys were losing it. Jim, the other ranger, shouted, "Stay in your tents," followed shortly by, "She's coming around at us," and then, "There's another one," and finally, "Let's get the fuck out of here." At that point, we turned off the flashlights, grabbed the lion pelt in the darkness, and jumped in the jeep and sped off. Just after sunrise, they started peeking out of their tents. Nobody was brave enough to get out until about 8:30. They saw all the huge paw and claw prints everywhere. They really freaked out. Your tax dollars went hard to work for those asshole frat boys. I'm not a ranger, but an avid mountain climber here in the Philippines. One time my group went on a night hike to a mountain located in central Luzon. Naturally, we took the easier trail, North Peak, since we were hiking with some newbies. At around 4 a.m., we broke camp and started our descent. Almost 1 hour in, we noticed that we kept passing the same fallen tree and the same boulder. The trail was very straightforward, and many of us have climbed the mountain before, but for some reason, all of us were going round in circles. One of the more superstitious hikers decided to make us all stand in a circle, utter a prayer, and leave an offering of food. Only then were we able to complete our descent. I have been a ranger in the USFS for almost 15 years, and this takes place about 3 years after I joined. We were getting calls about a lone wolf with a collar on, hanging around campsites. This is pretty weird, since wolves aren't known to be generally in this area. But when you work in the field long enough, you start to realize that anything is possible. No calls had ever mentioned violent behavior from the animal, so thank God. I departed from the station around noon to check out the places that it had been sighted. Wandered around for about 3 hours, no further calls during that time, until I took a break for water. I sat down, had a snack, drank some water, and was getting ready to go out again when the thing was about 20 feet out, trotting near the tree line. It seemed friendly and had the collar on, so I whistled to it and he came over to me. Getting a closer look, I could see it wasn't a wolf. It was huge, but it was dark and didn't have the right body structure, though I could see why it could be confused from a distance. I radioed in and reported that I had the dog with me, but as soon as I said I'd bring it in, the dog fucking took off, like he was playing, to see how far he could get me to chase him. Typical dog behavior. I went after it, and I swear it was a game of chase for at least 5 minutes as we steadily ran through the forest. Now, please don't go running through the woods unless you know the area like the back of your hand. The dog finally slowed down near a rock bed and creek area and started pacing around a single spot. I drew closer and didn't see anything really off at first, then I noticed it. The overgrowth had almost extinguished what appeared to be bones. I called it in immediately, and another team was sent to recover the remains. When I went to retrieve the dog, he was just gone, but honestly, it wasn't really a high priority at the moment. He was friendly enough, and I figured we'd catch up again later. The bones were identified as a teenage male's. He died by a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. He'd been reported missing in the area long before I became a ranger, and there had been pretty much no hope of finding him. I spoke to his mother on the phone. She called to thank me personally, and she asked how I found her son. I mentioned the black dog, then thought I'd said something wrong since she was on pause on the other side of the line. After I gave a couple details about the dog, she quietly explained that her son, who struggled with making connections, had sunken into a deep depression after the death of his best friend, the very dog that led me to him. I think I spent the rest of the day stunned. I continue to be in disbelief, in a way, but I know what happened. This wasn't me, but rather my dad's story, who is a ranger. He said that once he was out in the forest with one of his other ranger buddies because they had to camp overnight halfway to their destination. Well, that night, they heard footsteps, and a lot of them, outside of their tent. Then, suddenly, they heard at least 20 people scream out simultaneously, "Get out!" Needless to say, they got the fuck out of there and radioed it in. The next morning, the cops were called and went out and searched the area. They ended up finding 4 skinned animals pinned to the trees around their campsite. My mom worked for the Forest Fire Department in the late 70s. She worked the radio, I think. She said that this one time, she heard her friend die in a forest fire over the radio. Screaming, crying, and the crackling of the heat. It isn't super strange, but it would be one of the worst things I can ever imagine happening to someone. Hey guys, it's Gotay here. I want to thank you so much for listening to the scary story montage. I mean, park rangers do see some really creepy things, and I think in the next episode, I'm going to do a Native American cryptid urban legend story mashup. We'll see, because those are also really interesting to me, and I'm sure interesting to everyone else. So stay tuned for that. If you haven't already, like, comment, and subscribe. And if you have any stories of your own, please send them to me via my email, linked in the description below, and I'll definitely be sure to put that in one of my videos. So, stay safe, stay quarantined, and I will see you mates in the next episode.